They said a broken soldier and a ruined billionaire had nothing left to live for. Until the night God crossed their paths. What began as fear on a dark mountain road became a miracle forged in danger, betrayal, and redemption. And when the man they feared most finally found them, God revealed the truth that would change everything. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from and subscribe for more stories of faith, courage, and the miracles God hides in the darkest places. The mountain road lay quiet beneath a sky brushed with fading winter light, its silence broken only by the steady hum of a small cargo truck climbing through the pines. Logan Reed kept both hands on the wheel, though one of them trembled faintly, with the subtle echo of an old memory he wished he could forget. Ranger, the German shepherd who had become more guardian than pet, sat upright on the passenger seat, his gaze sharp and alert, as if keeping watch over the space that Logan's thoughts kept wandering through. The cabin where Logan lived waited several miles deeper into the woods, alone and unbothered by the world's noise. It was the sort of place he had chosen not because he loved solitude, but because solitude made his mind quieter, at least on the good days. On the bad ones, he could hear his heartbeat pounding like distant artillery, smell heat and smoke where there was none, feel the churn of combat twisting inside him with a grip that years had failed to loosen. Tonight was shaping into one of those nights. He could sense it in the way the cold felt sharper, how even the wind seemed to drag old ghosts behind it. Logan had spent the day delivering supplies for the small general store near the edge of town. Simple work, predictable routes, no sudden noises or surprises, exactly the kind of job someone with his history needed. The store owner didn't ask many questions, and Logan preferred it that way. People meant conversations, and conversations meant probing, and probing meant peeling back layers he had spent years carefully stitching shut. Ranger sensed his unrest long before Logan did. The dog had a way of pressing closer whenever the tension in the truck thickened, as if reminding Logan that at least one creature in the world still believed he was steady enough to lean on. But as the truck rounded a slow bend, Logan braked without thinking. Ranger's ears shot up. Something, or someone, was standing a short distance ahead on the icy roadside, hunched slightly, but not in a posture of weakness. More like defiance holding itself upright against exhaustion. A man, older than Logan, hair streaked with age, and the kind of stubborn pride that didn't fade even when life had begun stripping everything else away. He stood beside a weather-beaten guardrail, hands empty, though it was clear from the stiffness in his shoulders that he wasn't there by choice. The man turned his head slowly toward the truck's headlights, eyes narrowing as though every beam of light was an insult. Logan stopped the truck beside him. Ranger gave a low, uncertain rumble, not aggression, but recognition of something wounded yet unyielding. "You all right?" Logan called through the rolled-down window. The man didn't answer. His gaze flicked from Logan to Ranger, then to the snowy forest beyond, as though searching for a path out of a world he refused to be pitied by. "You need a ride somewhere?" Logan asked again. "I need nothing," the man replied, his voice dry, as if scraped raw by hunger, but refusing to let hunger speak first. "And I don't take charity." Logan exhaled slowly. Pride, he recognized it well. Pride had kept him alive in places where hope couldn't. Pride had also nearly destroyed him when he got home and realized there was no enemy left to fight except himself. The man swayed slightly, the kind of sway that came from a body long past its limits, even while the spirit inside refused to kneel. His stomach gave a faint, unintentional growl. The sound hung in the night air like something fragile, exposed. Ranger stepped forward between the seats, staring at the man as if urging Logan to do something other than drive away. "There's food in the back," Logan said carefully. "Not charity, just extra from my delivery. You can take it if you want." The man's jaw clenched, as if the offer cut deeper than the cold. "I said I don't need help." Then consider it a trade, Logan answered, though he wasn't sure for what. I offer it, you take it, no debts. For a moment the man simply stared. Then, with reluctant steps, he approached the rear of the truck. Logan hopped out and opened the cargo door. Inside lay boxes from earlier deliveries and a small bag he hadn't eaten yet. Logan handed it over without another word. The man accepted it, but only barely, like it burned to touch. He turned away quickly, but Logan noticed the slight tremor in his fingers, the stiffness in his breath, the way fatigue wrapped around him like an invisible chain. "What's your name?" Logan asked. The man hesitated. It wasn't the hesitation of forgetting, but of calculating what he was willing to reveal. "Call me Avery," he said at last, though the name sounded borrowed, like a coat put on for convenience. "That's all anyone needs to know." Logan nodded. He didn't push. He knew what it meant to hide behind a name that wasn't meant to carry weight. The wind shifted, bringing with it the eerie creak of branches and the faint thump of something distant. Logan's chest tightened. He swallowed hard, bracing for the old intrusive memory, the one where the sky erupted and the ground shook and everything he touched felt like metal, coated in blood. Ranger pressed against his leg, nudging him back into the present. "You shouldn't stay out here," Logan finally said. "Storm's coming. You can freeze in a few hours if you don't have shelter." Avery turned his eyes toward the horizon, where storm clouds gathered like bruises across the sky. He grunted softly, not acceptance, not refusal, but the acknowledgement of a man who had run out of options and hated that he had. "Fine," Avery muttered, "but only for the night." Logan gestured him toward the passenger side. Avery climbed in slowly, still gripping the food bag he had claimed, as if afraid someone might snatch away the last scrap of dignity he carried. Ranger shifted to the back seat, sitting behind Logan but watching Avery with the caution of a soldier who had survived too many ambushes. As the truck started moving, the road ahead seemed to stretch into colder shadows. Logan felt the weight of another human presence in his quiet world, a world he had carefully kept empty. Avery's silence wasn't peaceful. It was a silence that clashed against itself, sharp and restless. Logan didn't know who Avery really was. He didn't know why the man's voice carried buried anger or why his eyes held a flicker of fear wrapped tightly behind defiance. But he knew this much. No one stood alone on a deserted mountain road at night unless they were running from something or toward something worse. Whatever Avery brought into Logan's truck, it wasn't just hunger. It was the beginning of a storm deeper than the one building in the sky. And Logan, despite everything in him screaming for quiet, had just invited that storm into his home. The cabin's single lamp cast a dim circle of light across the wooden floor as the storm pressed against the windows, its distant growl echoing through the pines. Logan closed the door behind Avery, and Ranger settled near the hearth, though he watched the older man with a steady vigilance sharpened by years spent reading intentions before they were spoken. Avery stood in the center of the room, as if unsure whether he intended to stay or flee. The pride that had kept him upright on the roadside still clung to him, but the cold and exhaustion had softened its edges. He seemed less afraid of danger than of accepting help, as though generosity might crack something inside him. Logan placed a mug of warm broth on the table and motioned for him to sit. Avery hesitated long enough for the silence to become awkward, but then surrendered to a truth his body could not argue with. He sat, lifted the cup, and seemed surprised by how deeply relief could settle into tired bones. Logan remained across from him, his posture calm but careful. He spoke rarely in these situations, not because he lacked words, but because words sometimes scattered his thoughts into dark corners. Ranger sensed the tension in both men, and each time Logan's breath tightened, the dog edged closer to his chair. Avery finally set the cup down. "I suppose you want to know why I was out there?" Logan shook his head. "People end up on that road for all sorts of reasons. I don't need to know yours unless you want me to. Avery exhaled, long and strained, like a man lowering a weight he had carried too far. There was a time, he began, when I owned more than most people ever dream of, not inherited, built. He didn't sound proud, only tired. Business, technology, investments, all the things that make a man feel untouchable until he realizes he has built his walls out of paper. Logan understood walls made of paper. He had built similar ones around memory and survival. What happened? Avery looked into the fire. The flames mirrored faintly in eyes that carried too many unspoken nights. A man I trusted, my manager. He knew the inner workings of everything I built, every success, every vulnerability. And he decided he wanted more. So he manufactured false documents, redirected funds, manipulated the board. Overnight, everything that was mine became evidence against me. I was stripped of my position, my access, my voice. Logan did not interrupt. Avery continued, the words flowing now that they had been unburied. But that wasn't enough for him. He needed me gone, not just ruined, because I know things he fears becoming public. The cabin grew still. Outside, the storm thrashed harder, rattling the shutters like a warning. Logan felt something shift inside him, a subtle alignment, the way instinct clicks into place before thought. Ranger rose quietly, as if sensing a threat not yet visible. Avery reached into his coat and placed a small, damaged flash drive on the table. Its casing was cracked, the metal bent slightly. This survived, barely. It's only a fraction of the proof I once had. The rest is gone or inaccessible. He paused. Then, with a tone carved from resignation, I've been hunted since the day I ran. As long as that man fears exposure, I remain a loose thread he's determined to cut. Logan stared at the flash drive. The object was small, insignificant looking, but he had learned long ago that danger often arrived in unremarkable containers. He lifted his gaze to Avery. The older man's shoulders sagged, not in defeat, but in the exhaustion of someone forced to carry both guilt and injustice. Logan could see the years of pressure shaping him into a man who could no longer trust the world he once commanded. "Why tell me this?" Logan asked. Avery's answer came after a long silence. "Because no one helps a man like me without wanting something in return. Yet you did. And for the first time in months I found myself believing I wasn't being watched." Logan felt the familiar tightening in his chest, the kind that came before a memory tried to claw its way up. He steadied his breath. "I don't want anything," he said. "I only want to understand what trouble I've brought into my home." Avery's eyes softened with something almost like shame. "I didn't intend to bring danger to your doorstep. I didn't intend to bring myself here at all." Logan offered him another blanket and motioned toward the cot near the wall. Avery accepted it silently. Ranger circled once, then lay near the cot, not close enough to threaten, but close enough to guard. Logan sat by the small window, listening to the storm settle into a steady rhythm. Avery eventually spoke again, his voice quieter this time. "I used to fund dozens of charities, schools, outreach programs, all of it numbers on reports, but today, when you brought me along your delivery route, I saw faces. I saw people surviving on little more than hope and stubborn will, and I realized how empty my definition of help had been." Logan glanced toward him. Avery wasn't looking for approval. He was speaking like a man who had confronted a truth too long ignored. "It changes you," Logan said, "seeing what life looks like for someone with fewer choices." Avery nodded. "It made me remember that somewhere beneath everything I lost, there might still be a man worth salvaging." For a moment, silence wrapped the cabin again, but now it felt less heavy. Avery lay back on the cot and closed his eyes, the kind of closing that comes not from safety, but from temporary surrender. Logan watched him, not with suspicion, but with a wary acknowledgement that fate had placed a stranger with a dangerous past in his home. Ranger drifted into light sleep, though his ears twitched at every gust of wind. Logan's mind wandered to thoughts he didn't want. The roadside, Avery's pride, the flash drive, the way fear hid behind the man's controlled composure, the knowledge that someone out there wanted him erased. Logan whispered to the room, though no one was truly awake to hear it, "You didn't just walk into these mountains by accident." The fire crackled in response, sending a thin column of sparks upward. Outside, somewhere far down the road, a sound rose briefly beneath the storm, a distant engine, slow and deliberate, cutting through the dark like a predator testing the edges of its territory. Logan straightened, alert. It could have been nothing, or it could have been the beginning of the danger Avery had warned him about. Either way, tomorrow would demand answers he wasn't sure he was ready to face. The storm outside began to fade, but the one he had just invited into his home was only beginning to gather shape. The morning arrived wrapped in a pale, wintry quiet, the kind that felt too still for comfort, as if the forest itself were listening for something unseen. Logan stepped outside the cabin with Ranger at his heel, scanning the frosted tree line with the instinct of someone who had learned to distrust silence. The storm had passed, but the unease in Logan's chest had not. Something in last night's distant engine sound still clung to him like a warning left unfinished. Inside, Avery sat at the small table, staring at the cold remains of his untouched tea. He looked like a man bracing for a verdict he already knew. Logan studied him for a moment before speaking. "That sound last night, you think it was for you?" Avery's jaw tightened. "He's found me before in places that should have been impossible. I stopped believing in coincidences months ago." Ranger paced once, an uneasy rhythm that mirrored the weight settling in Logan's mind. Avery ran a hand across his forehead, not out of exhaustion, but out of strategy, as if assessing a map no one else could see. "There's one thing I haven't told you," he said quietly. Logan's pulse steadied into a slower, colder beat. He'd learned that people never ran for one reason alone. "Say it," he replied. Avery leaned back, eyes unfocused for a moment, as though tracking ghosts. "The man hunting me, Victor Hale, wasn't just my manager. He was the architect of everything I built. Numbers, projections, contacts, influence. He knew how to expand a company faster than the market could breathe. But with ambition like his, there's always a shadow behind it." Logan waited, letting Avery choose the pace of his confession. "I didn't see the shadow until it bared its teeth," Avery continued. "Illegal funnels, off-record transfers, covert investments tied to people you don't question unless you want to disappear. When I confronted him, he smiled as though I were a child who had finally learned how cruel the world could be." Avery's voice hardened, not with anger, but with the brittle resignation of someone who had replayed that moment alone too many times. "He told me I could keep my company name or keep breathing. I chose wrong." Logan's heartbeat thudded again, deep and instinctive. He had stood across from men like that, ones who spoke softly but carried the weight of untraceable violence behind them. Avery lifted the damaged flash drive from the table. "This isn't the real proof, not even close. The real evidence is locked in a hidden compartment in my home in Jackson Hole. If I get it to the authorities, Victor's empire collapses. If he gets to me first, I vanish." Logan considered the implications, not just of Avery's words, but of the direction fate had begun to shift beneath them. He had promised himself no more rescues, no more wars waged in the margins of society. But here he was again, standing at the edge of another man's battlefield. Avery looked up suddenly, his expression sharp with fear that had grown too large to hide. "I never wanted to involve you. I thought, if I kept moving, he'd eventually lose interest." Logan shook his head slowly. "Men like him don't lose interest. They tighten the leash." Avery swallowed hard. "Then my running has only brought danger to your door." Logan stepped away from the window and sat across from him. Danger comes whether we invite it or not. What matters is what you do when it arrives." Ranger pressed against Logan's leg, picking up on a shift in his tone. Logan scratched behind the dog's ear, grounding himself before speaking again. "You were a man with everything, Avery, and now you're living on fear and borrowed time. But you said something yesterday about seeing people in need and feeling something change inside you." Avery blinked, surprised that Logan remembered. Logan continued, "Maybe this is the moment you stop running. Maybe this is the moment you stand up again. But you need to tell me exactly what we're facing, or we both walk blind into whatever's coming." Avery closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them, the hesitation was gone, replaced by a stark clarity. Victor has 2 men with him at all times, loyal, paid well. They don't ask questions. They've handled things for him before. I've seen what happens when someone refuses to cooperate. Logan felt a familiar coldness settle over him, the same coldness that had steadied him in places where retreat was not an option. "They won't stop with intimidation. They'll push until you break." Avery nodded. "That's why I can't do this alone, but I also can't demand you risk anything for me." Logan's eyes drifted to Ranger, who stood watching both men with a focused patience. That dog had dragged him from himself more times than he liked to admit. "I'm not risking anything blindly," Logan said, "but if this man is as dangerous as you say, then leaving you to face him alone is a death sentence." Avery's breath wavered, not from fear but from the fragile shock of being believed. Before he could speak, Ranger stiffened. His ears shot forward, his stance changed, alert, deliberate. Logan instantly moved toward the window. A vehicle crawled along the distant road, half hidden by trees, moving with unnatural slowness, as though searching. Avery's face drained of color. "It's them." Logan grabbed his keys and a canvas bag he kept by the door. Old habit, never fully unlearned. "We can't stay here." Avery stood, panic flickering through the cracks of his composure. "Where do we go?" Logan looked at him with a calm forged through fire. "You said the evidence is in your house, then that's where we go." Avery froze. "Victor will expect that." "Good," Logan replied. "Expectation makes people predictable, and predictable men make mistakes." Ranger barked once, sharp and urgent, as the vehicle turned down the narrow forest road leading toward the cabin. Avery clutched the flash drive with trembling resolve. "If we go back there, Victor will try to kill us both." Logan opened the door and motioned for him to move. "Then we don't give him the chance." The wind rushed in, carrying with it the scent of snow and distant engines. Avery hesitated only a heartbeat more before stepping outside. Logan followed, Ranger at his side, aware that the next steps they took would bind their fates to something far larger than a roadside encounter. And somewhere behind the trees, the hunter was already closing in. The forest held its breath as the 3 of them disappeared into the deepening morning, toward a past Avery had tried to escape and a confrontation none of them were yet prepared to face. The highway stretched beneath a muted sky, its gray ribbon winding through miles of open land, as Logan drove toward Jackson Hole with a growing sense of inevitability pressing on his chest. The landscape shifted from forested quiet to broad valleys, and the farther they went, the more Avery seemed to fold into himself, as though each passing mile peeled away another layer of distance between him and the life he once ruled. Ranger remained alert in the back seat, his gaze moving between Avery and the windows, sensing the tension sharpening like a blade. Logan had driven into danger many times before, sometimes for orders, sometimes for instinct, but never for a man he had known only 2 days. Yet something in Avery's desperation had struck a familiar chord, the kind of silent plea buried in people who had once been powerful, but were now trapped in their own collapse. Avery finally spoke, barely above a whisper. "I don't know what condition the house will be in. Victor has access to everything I once owned." Logan's hands tightened on the wheel. his mind already mapping angles of entry and escape. Then we assume he's already thought ahead. We adapt. Avery nodded, though uncertainty flickered in his eyes. I hid the evidence in a place only I could access, a panel behind a wall safe, connected to a manual lock system. Even Victor didn't know its existence. If it's still intact, it will prove everything I've said. Logan didn't reply. Ranger shifted again, nose tilted toward the front, sensing Avery's rising anxiety. After several hours, the towering silhouette of Avery's former home appeared beyond the tree line, a sprawling mountain residence that seemed carved into the hillside, overlooking the valley like a silent sentinel. Avery watched it with a mix of grief and steeled resolve. "I built that place as a sanctuary," he murmured. "Funny how sanctuaries turn into traps once your name is no longer your own." Logan parked the truck where the terrain shielded it from direct view. Instinct told him not to approach from the front. He motioned for Avery to stay close and stepped into the cold air, Ranger silently joining him. As they moved through the trees toward the backside of the house, Logan read the signs the way soldiers read a battlefield. A faint ridge in the snow, a tread mark, partially erased. Someone had been here recently and not casually. Avery spotted it too. His breath caught. "He's already searched." "Then we assume he's still around," Logan replied. "Stay behind me." They reached a service entrance half concealed by a sloping wall of stone. Logan tested the handle. Unlocked. Not a good sign. Inside, the air felt stale, almost abandoned, yet not untouched. Logan scanned the hallway, noting the smallest disturbances, a crooked frame, dust displaced near the molding, a faint scuff on the baseboard. Someone had moved through here with purpose. Avery's breathing turned uneven, not out of fear, but out of remembering what had been taken from him. "He walked through my life like it was nothing." Logan motioned for silence and led them through a narrow corridor toward the study. Ranger's low warning hum halted them just before the doorway. Logan listened. A faint scrape, shuffling, and then voices, 2, maybe 3, speaking in controlled, low tones. Avery froze as if rooted to the floor. Logan leaned close. "They're searching. The safe," Avery whispered, "behind the shelving, but they'll never find the hidden lock without knowing its location." Logan nodded once. "Stay quiet. Stay behind me." He eased closer until he could see into the study. 2 men were inside, broad, steady movements, the kind of calm efficiency that suggested they'd done this kind of search many times. New characters, but Logan recognized their type immediately. Professionals hired not for muscle alone, but for precision. One of them, a man with clipped speech and the posture of someone accustomed to command, issued instructions. "Check the seams along the wall again. If he hid something, it's not in the obvious place." The name Victor wasn't spoken, but the air almost vibrated with his presence. Logan motioned for Avery to back away silently, then scanned the hall for another route. The hidden evidence panel was located inside the study, behind the moving bookshelf. The only way to reach it was through the men currently tearing the room apart. Ranger pressed close to Logan's leg, understanding the storm ahead. Avery leaned in, whispering with a tremor he fought hard to suppress. "What do we do?" Logan's mind shifted into the mode that had kept him alive in places where seconds decided fate. "We wait for the right opening, and when it comes, we take it fast." They retreated a short distance into a side passage, barely wide enough for 2 men. Avery pressed his back against the wall, gripping the flash drive like a relic of the life he refused to surrender. "I never imagined I'd return like this," he murmured. "A trespasser in a place that once belonged to me." Logan studied him. "Ownership isn't measured by paperwork, it's measured by truth. And right now, truth's the only weapon you've got left." Avery held that thought as though anchoring himself to it. Suddenly, footsteps echoed, approaching fast. Logan grabbed Avery and pulled him into a utility alcove just as one of the hired men passed by, muttering into a radio. "No sign of him yet. Victor will be here soon." Those words struck Avery harder than any threat. Logan made his decision. Waiting was no longer an option. They had minutes, at most, before Victor arrived. Logan signaled Ranger and moved with a calculated precision toward the study. One of the men bent over the shelves, pushing them roughly aside. Logan stepped behind him and drove a forceful blow to the back of his neck, dropping him silently. The second man spun toward the noise, reaching under his jacket. Ranger launched forward, intercepting him with enough force to send the weapon skidding across the floor. Logan tackled him, knocking the wind out of him, and rendered him unconscious with a swift maneuver born from muscle memory forged in places Avery could never imagine. Avery stood frozen in the doorway, shock and relief battling across his expression. Logan pointed toward the shelf. "Show me the hidden lock." Avery hurried forward, hands shaking but purposeful. He pressed a barely visible indentation along the left edge of the shelving. A soft click echoed. The panel slid loose. Behind it lay the concealed compartment, untouched. Avery entered the code manually. A faint mechanical release sounded, and the panel opened. Inside, wrapped in weatherproof casing, was the full evidence drive. Avery's breath cracked. This is everything." Logan nodded, but his attention snapped toward the hallway. A new engine had stopped outside. Heavy steps approached the front entrance. Ranger's ears flattened. Avery went pale. "It's him." The front door opened. A calm, confident voice drifted through the halls. "Avery, you always did have a flair for making things complicated." Logan's eyes hardened. Avery clutched the evidence like a lifeline. Ranger growled low, ready for whatever came next. And as Victor Hale's footsteps entered the study corridor, Logan whispered, "Stay behind me. This ends tonight." The study corridor lay heavy with tension, the storm-muted daylight filtering weakly through the tall windows, as Victor Hale's footsteps advanced with unhurried confidence. Logan positioned himself between Avery and the approaching threat, the evidence drive still clutched in Avery's hand like a lifeline pulled from the depths. Ranger stood beside Logan, every muscle taut, his instincts sharpened by the kind of danger that once defined the battlefield. Victor appeared in the doorway with the measured presence of a man accustomed to power. He did not posture or raise his voice. He simply observed the scene, the unconscious men on the floor, the open panel in the wall, the drive in Avery's grasp, and allowed a faint, humorless amusement to settle across the room. He was older than his reputation suggested, his composure shaped not by brute force, but by years spent moving in circles where decisions ruined lives before breakfast. His past dealings with criminal financiers had taught him that fear was a currency more valuable than money. "I wondered what sort of man you'd find to protect you," Victor said, studying Logan with curiosity rather than threat. "A soldier with a wounded past. Predictable." Logan didn't react. Avery stepped closer to him, though his fear was barely contained. "Victor," he said, voice tight, "this ends now." Victor tilted his head. "Ends? Avery, nothing ends unless I sign off on it." He took a measured step forward, and Logan shifted, creating a firmer barrier between them. Victor's gaze flicked to Ranger, noting the dog's unwavering stance. "You picked an interesting champion," he said softly. Logan replied, "I'm not his champion. I'm just not letting you kill him." Victor's smile held no warmth. "Kill him? No. Death would be a mercy. He knows too much. What I need is silence." Avery's voice cracked. "I didn't come back here to die." "Then you came back a fool," Victor answered. Logan felt Avery trembling behind him, but he also sensed something else, resolve beginning to stir beneath the fear. Avery had run for so long that facing the man who stole his life seemed impossible, yet here he was, clutching the proof that could bury Victor. Logan measured the room, the door behind Victor, the distance to the hall, the weight of the moment pressing on Avery, The tension locked the air in place. Victor spoke again, quietly, as though offering a favor. "Give me the drive, Avery. Walk away. Disappear. I'll even let your new friend live." Logan's pulse slowed into something steady. "We're not negotiating." Victor sighed as though disappointed by their lack of imagination. "You have no idea what you're stepping into. There are people behind me who make your war history look like a church picnic." Logan stiffened, not from intimidation, but from recognition. Men like Victor always leaned on bigger monsters. Avery straightened, a fractured but determined voice emerging. "I don't care who stands behind you, I won't run anymore." Victor studied him as if encountering a new species. Impressive, Avery, but still naive. Before Victor could move, Ranger growled, a low, dangerous sound that echoed through the study. Logan seized the moment. He stepped forward, cutting off Victor's line of advance, and the two men stood mere feet apart. Victor's expression hardened. The mask of civility slipped, revealing a sharpness long hidden beneath expensive suits and quiet threats. "You don't want to do this," Victor murmured. "You don't know what I've done." Logan answered with the calm of a man who had seen worse. "You don't know what I've survived." The confrontation snapped into motion when Victor reached into his coat. Logan reacted instantly, grabbing Victor's arm and slamming him back against the shelving. Ranger lunged, ensuring the second hand never found its weapon. Avery stumbled backward but held the evidence tight, as though terrified the moment would evaporate if he loosened his grip. Victor struggled, but Logan's strength, honed by years of surviving chaos, overpowered the older man's calculated confidence. Still, Victor was not without cunning. He twisted sharply, knocking Logan off balance for a heartbeat. It was enough for Victor to slip a hand into his pocket and pull out a compact signal device. "You think I came alone?" he hissed. Logan's eyes flashed, understanding the threat, even before Victor pressed the button. Avery's breath hitched. Reinforcements. Logan grabbed Victor's wrist, slamming the device from his hand. It skidded across the floor. Ranger stood over it, teeth bared. Victor's mask shattered. "You have no idea who you're up against." Logan forced Victor toward the ground. "Doesn't matter," he said. "This ends today." But just as Logan secured Victor, a car screeched outside, not approaching quietly, approaching fast, reckless, unplanned. Avery froze. "That's not one of his men." Logan dragged Victor upright. "Who else knows you're here?" Avery shook his head. "No one." The front door burst open. Heavy footsteps echoed through the hall. Logan braced for another enemy, but when the figure appeared in the study entrance, the tension shifted in a way none of them expected. A woman stood there, not armed, not hostile, but breathless, shaken. She had a presence shaped by long months of searching and sleepless nights. Her name was Marla Downing, a former financial investigator who had once worked closely with Avery's company. She had been fired when Victor began consolidating power, and she had since dedicated her time to tracking the truth Avery had vanished with. Her role in the old company gave her insight into Victor's corruption, and she had spent months trying to find evidence of her own. She stared at Avery, disbelief and relief colliding. "I finally found you," she said. Avery whispered, stunned. "Marla? You're alive?" Victor sneered. "Pathetic. You still think she matters?" Marla's glare cut through the tension like a blade. "I recorded everything," she said. "Every transfer, every shell account. All I needed was your proof to complete the case." Logan tightened his grip on Victor. The tide had shifted. Avery stared at Marla with something close to hope. The first true glimpse since he'd arrived in Logan's truck. Victor realized too late what had changed. Logan began restraining him with improvised ties from the incapacitated guards. Marla retrieved the signal device from under Ranger's watchful eye and crushed it under her boot. "No backup," she said. "Not for you." Victor finally looked afraid. Avery handed Marla the evidence drive, his hand still trembling. "This This will clear everything? Marla nodded. This will bury him. Police sirens began to echo faintly in the valley. Marla had called them before entering the house, knowing she might not walk out otherwise. Logan stepped back, Ranger beside him, watching Avery reclaim the life stolen from him. Victor, pinned and powerless, realized his empire had collapsed, not through force, but through truth resurfacing. As officers stormed the residence, taking Victor and his men into custody, Avery stood in the center of his home, breathing heavily, the weight of months lifting from his shoulders. He turned to Logan. "I never could have done this alone." Logan gave a faint, tired smile. "Then it's a good thing you weren't alone." But something deeper moved in Avery's eyes, a recognition, a shift, the beginning of something new. "I don't want to go back to the life I had," he said. "I want to build something that helps people who have no voice, people like I became." Logan nodded, feeling a rare warmth in his chest, a purpose reclaimed, a man restored. As the officers escorted Victor away, the last thing Logan saw was the collapsing facade of a man who had believed himself untouchable. Ranger pressed against Logan's leg, as if grounding him. The danger was over, but the journey ahead was just beginning. Avery looked toward the horizon beyond the tall windows, where the winter light was slowly shifting. "Let's go home," he said. And for the first time, Logan believed the word meant something more than a cabin in the woods. It meant survival, redemption, and a future neither man had expected to find. Sometimes the greatest miracles do not come as thunder or lightning, nor as sudden victories or dramatic rescues. They arrive quietly, through the kindness of strangers, the courage to stand again after falling, or the unexpected companionship God places on our path. Logan, Avery, and Ranger were three broken souls walking three separate roads. Yet by God's mysterious grace, their roads met at the exact moment each man needed the other most. That is how miracles work, not always by changing the world around us, but by changing the people who walk into our lives. And just like Logan, who found purpose again, or Avery, who found redemption after losing everything, each of us is invited to believe that God still moves gently in the quiet corners of everyday life, in the helping hand, in the whispered prayer, in the courage to forgive, and in the hope that rises when everything else seems lost. If you are going through trials, loneliness, or fear, remember this: God never wastes pain. Every struggle you face is shaping a future you cannot yet see. Every tear you shed waters the soil of a new beginning, and every act of kindness, no matter how small, may be the very miracle someone has been praying for. So may God bless you, protect your family, strengthen your faith, and guide your steps. May He work quietly in your life the way He worked in Logan's, healing what was broken, lifting what was heavy, and bringing light to places that once knew only shadows.